Marcus Freeman stood at the edge of the Dallas International Airport terminal, his sneakers rooted to the polished floor as if the weight of his dreams might lift him off it entirely. The air thrummed with life, jet engines growling low beyond the glass walls, the tang of fuel seeping through the seams of the building, voices overlapping in a symphony of departure and arrival. To most, it was just an airport, a place of hurried goodbyes and overpriced coffee. To Marcus, it was sacred ground, a threshold between earth and sky where every takeoff whispered possibility. At 17, with a lopsided grin and eyes that held a quiet fire, he'd spent years imagining this moment. Today wasn't just a visit, it was a coronation, the day his passion for aviation would finally take wing. He fingered the guest badge clipped to his jacket, its edges smooth from nervous tracing. Marcus Freeman, Horizon Airlines, Wings of Tomorrow program. The words stared back at him, bold and official, a ticket he'd earned through sleepless nights and 1,000 scratched-out drafts. The national essay contest had been brutal, pitting him against hundreds of hopefuls, but his piece, "The Sky Belongs to the Brave," had soared above them all. It wasn't just words on a page, it was his life, distilled into ink, the way he'd lie awake as a boy, tracing contrails through his bedroom window, the afternoon spent with his mom, Tanya, at the edge of a local airstrip, her laughter mingling with the roar of propellers as he sketched Cessnas and 747s in a weathered notebook. She'd been his first co-pilot, a single mom who worked double shifts at the hospital but never let him feel small. "You're built for the clouds, Marcus," she'd say, her voice steady as a compass. Now, holding that badge, he felt her faith pulsing through him, a quiet engine driving him forward. The pilot's lounge loomed ahead, its frosted glass doors a portal to a world he'd only dreamed of entering. He pushed through, the cool air inside brushing his face like a promise. The room was a pilot's haven, dark wood paneling, chairs upholstered in leather that smelled faintly of polish, a widescreen TV flickering with footage of planes slicing through endless blue. A coffee machine gurgled in the corner, and a few uniformed figures milled about, their gold stripes catching the light. Marcus's pulse quickened. This wasn't a waiting room, it was a cockpit on the ground, a place where flight plans were born and legends traded stories. He was here to meet Ms. Carter, the HR rep who'd championed his essay, promising a tour of a Boeing 737's controls. It was the first step toward the life he'd mapped out since he was old enough to hold a pencil, a life where he'd trade his sketchbook for a yoke, his dreams for wings. He sank into a chair, the leather creaking under him, and let the TV's narration pull him in. It was a documentary on early aviators, barnstormers and daredevils who defied gravity with little more than grit and canvas wings. Marcus leaned forward, elbows on his knees, drinking in every word. He could name those planes blindfolded. The Sopwith Camel's snub nose, the Spirit of St. Louis's silver sweep, each one a piece of the mosaic he'd built in his mind. For a fleeting moment, he wasn't just Marcus Freeman, high school junior. He was one of them, a pioneer poised to carve his name into the sky. The door swung open with a force that jolted him upright, the sound a thunderclap in the quiet room. Captain Laura Hensley stepped in, her presence filling the space like a cold front rolling off the plains. Her pilot's uniform was pristine, 4 gold stripes on her shoulders gleaming with authority, her blonde hair pulled tight beneath her cap. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, landed on Marcus and narrowed to slits. She didn't move toward him, not yet, but stood there, one hand on her hip, the other gripping her radio as if it were an extension of her will. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice a blade, precise and edged with something darker than curiosity. Marcus's throat tightened, but he rose to his feet, clutching the badge like a shield. "Hello, ma'am. I'm Marcus Freeman with the Wings of Tomorrow program. I'm waiting for Miss Carter. She's my guide. His words were steady, rehearsed in his head a dozen times on the bus ride over, but they felt fragile now, dwarfed by the weight of her stare. He held up the badge, its laminate catching the light, a proof of his belonging. But Hensley's expression didn't soften. She took a step closer, her boots striking the floor with a rhythm that echoed in his chest. "This isn't a field trip," she said, her tone clipped and cold. "That little trinket doesn't give you the right to waltz in here." The air shifted, heavy with something unspoken. Marcus's mind scrambled, searching for the right response, but all he could feel was the sting of her dismissal. She wasn't just doubting his badge, she was doubting him, his place, his very existence in this room. He'd faced skepticism before, teachers who'd raised eyebrows at his ambitions, classmates who'd smirked at his dog-eared aviation manuals, but this was different. This was personal, a rejection that clawed at the roots of his dream. "I'm not trespassing," he said, louder now, forcing his voice past the lump in his throat. "I won a contest. My essay got me here. I'm supposed to be here." Hensley's lips curled, a faint smirk that didn't reach her eyes. "An essay?" she repeated, as if the word itself were absurd. "I've been flying for Horizon for 18 years, kid. I've seen breaches that started with less convincing stories than yours." Her words carried a history Marcus couldn't know. A near miss years back. A baggage handler who'd slipped through security and cost her crew hours of delays. It had hardened her, turned vigilance into a reflex. But Marcus wasn't a threat. He was a boy with a pencil-smudged heart, standing on the precipice of everything he'd ever wanted, and she was shoving him back. The room stirred. A janitor paused mid-sweep, his broom stilling as he watched. A barista behind the counter tilted her head, her fingers hovering over a cup. Two pilots near the coffee machine glanced up, their conversation dying mid-sentence. Marcus felt their eyes like spotlights, pinning him in place, stripping away the armor of his badge. He wasn't invisible anymore. He was exposed, a stranger in a space he'd fought to enter. His mom's voice echoed in his mind, soft but firm. "Stand tall, Marcus, even when they try to shrink you." He squared his shoulders, meeting Hensley's gaze. "Please, ma'am, just check with Miss Carter. She'll tell you." Hensley didn't budge. She lifted the radio to her lips, her thumb pressing the button with deliberate force. "Security, pilot's lounge, immediate response. We've got an unauthorized individual with a questionable ID." The static crackled, her words reverberating through the room, and Marcus's breath caught. Unauthorized? The label sank into him, heavy and wrong. A stone dropped into the well of his hope. He opened his mouth to protest, but she cut him off with a glare that could have grounded a fleet. "Out," she said, pointing to the door. "This place isn't for you." The TV droned on, oblivious, recounting tales of courage and triumph, but Marcus felt none of it. His chest ached, a hollow space where pride had been moments before. The crowd thickened, more staff drifting closer, phones slipping from pockets to capture the scene. He was no longer a dreamer in their eyes. He was a problem, a disruption, a boy who'd dared to reach too high. His hands clenched at his sides, nails digging into his palms as he fought the tide of shame threatening to drown him. He'd imagined this day 100 times, shaking hands with pilots, tracing the lines of a cockpit, but not this, never this. Hensley turned away, dismissing him entirely, her radio still buzzing with the promise of security's arrival. Marcus stood there, rooted, the badge dangling uselessly from his fingers. His dream, so close he could taste it, was slipping through his grasp, torn apart by a woman who saw only what she wanted to see. But beneath the fear, beneath the hurt, a spark flickered. His mom's words, his own stubborn fire. He didn't know how, but he'd fight this. He had to, because the sky wasn't just a dream. It was his birthright, and no one, not even Captain Laura Hensley, could take that away. The pilot's lounge at Dallas International Airport felt like a shrinking cage around Marcus Freeman, its walls pressing in as Captain Laura Hensley's voice reverberated with unyielding certainty. She stood over him, her pilot's uniform a fortress of authority, the four gold stripes on her shoulders glinting like the bars of a cell. Marcus's guest badge, his hard-won proof of belonging, lay discarded on a nearby table where she'd tossed it, its laminate surface catching the light in a mockery of its former pride. "You think this gets you in?" Hensley said, her tone laced with scorn as she tapped the badge with a finger. "I've seen better fakes from kids sneaking into concerts. You're not fooling anyone." Marcus's chest tightened, a knot of disbelief and anger twisting beneath his ribs. He'd spent months crafting the essay that earned him a spot in Horizon Airlines' Wings of Tomorrow program, pouring his dreams into every sentence until they'd lifted him here. Now, that achievement was crumbling under Hensley's gaze, reduced to a prop in her narrative of suspicion. "It's not fake," he said, his voice trembling but resolute, rising above the hum of the TV still playing its aviation tales in the background. "Ms. Carter gave it to me this morning. I'm supposed to meet her here. I won the contest fair and square." He clung to the truth like a lifeline, hoping it could anchor him against the storm brewing in her eyes. Hensley's lips twisted into a thin, bitter smile, her head tilting as if he'd told a bad joke. "A contest?" she said, her words dripping with mockery. "You think a few pretty paragraphs make you one of us? I've logged thousands of hours in the sky, kid. 18 years of keeping planes aloft while people like you play pretend." She leaned closer, her shadow falling over him, and Marcus felt the air grow colder, heavier, as if her presence could snuff out the oxygen in the room. Her dismissal wasn't just about the badge, it was personal, a judgment carved from something deeper, something Marcus couldn't name but could feel in his bones. He wanted to shout back, to tell her about the nights he'd studied aerodynamics by flashlight, the way he could trace a 737's control panel from memory, but her stare pinned his words in his throat. The lounge wasn't quiet anymore. The janitor who'd paused his sweeping now leaned on his broom, watching with a furrowed brow. The barista behind the counter fidgeted with a stack of cups, her eyes darting between Marcus and Hensley as if weighing whether to step in. A cluster of pilots near the TV turned fully now, their murmurs rising like static, their phones slipping out to capture the unfolding drama. Marcus felt their scrutiny like a physical weight, each glance a thread tightening around his chest. He wasn't just a kid waiting for his mentor anymore. He was a spectacle, a riddle they were all trying to solve, and the answer they seemed to settle on wasn't the one he'd fought for. Hensley lifted her radio again, her thumb pressing the button with a click that echoed in Marcus's ears. "Security, expedite to the pilot's lounge. We've got a potential threat here, claims he's in some program but the ID doesn't hold up." Her voice was calm, professional, but the words landed like blows, each one stripping away another layer of Marcus's dignity. A threat? The label sank into him, sharp and jagged, cutting deeper than he'd thought possible. He wasn't a pilot in training to her. He was an intruder, a shadow in a space she guarded with fierce, unyielding certainty. "Ma'am, please," he said, stepping forward, his hands raised in a plea. "Call Ms. Carter. She'll tell you I'm legit. I'm not here to cause trouble." She didn't even look at him. "Trouble's already here," she said, her eyes scanning the growing crowd as if rallying them to her cause. "You don't belong in this room, and I'm not waiting around to find out why you're really here." The accusation hung in the air, thick and suffocating, and Marcus's mind reeled. Why he was really here? He was here because he'd earned it, because he'd spent years dreaming of wings, because his mom had believed in him when no one else did. But Hensley didn't see that. She saw something else, something Marcus couldn't unsee once it clicked. The color of his skin, the way it marked him as an outsider in her world of gold stripes and cockpit thrones. Footsteps thudded down the hall, heavy and purposeful, and two security officers pushed through the door. Officer Tate, a wiry man with a jaw set like concrete, led the way, his eyes flicking from Hensley to Marcus with a measured calm. Behind him came a stocky woman, her clipboard clutched like a shield, her pen already scratching notes. "Captain, what's the situation?" Tate asked, his voice low but firm. Hensley straightened, her authority snapping back into place. "Unauthorized entry in a restricted area," she said, pointing at Marcus without breaking eye contact with Tate. "Says he's part of some youth thing, but that badge is questionable at best. Could be gathering intel, scoping the place. I want him out." Marcus's stomach lurched. Gathering intel? The absurdity of it might have made him laugh if his heart weren't hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. He'd been watching a documentary on wing lift, sketching imaginary flight paths in his head, not plotting some heist. But Hensley's words painted a different picture, and the officers bought into it, their postures shifting from neutral to guarded. Tate stepped closer, his gaze softening for a moment as it met Marcus's. Maybe he saw the panic there, the plea, but duty overrode doubt. "Son, we need to take you for a check," he said, his tone almost apologetic. "Let's keep this smooth, okay?" "Smooth?" Marcus echoed, his voice cracking as he backed up a step. "I didn't do anything wrong. I'm supposed to be here." His hands shook, and he shoved them into his pockets to hide it, but the tremor crept into his words. He thought of his mom, her tired smile after a long shift, the way she'd always told him to hold his head high. He couldn't let her down now, couldn't let Hensley win. "Please, just let me call my dad," he said, pulling out his phone with fumbling fingers. "He'll clear this up. He knows I'm here." Hensley's smirk returned, sharp and cutting. "Your dad, huh? What's he gonna do? Sweep the floors faster to get you out of this?" A ripple of laughter spread through the crowd, soft but piercing, and Marcus's face burned. She didn't know James Freeman, didn't know the man who'd risen from a mechanic's grease-stained hands to the FAA's upper ranks, who taught Marcus how to dream big and fight hard. Her words twisted that legacy into an insult, and the shame stung worse than the fear. He dialed anyway, each ring a lifeline, a prayer that his dad's voice would break through this nightmare. The officers hovered, Tate's hand resting lightly on his belt, the woman's pen still scratching, while Hensley paced like a predator circling prey. "This is why we can't let our guard down," she said, raising her voice for the audience. "One slip, and it's not just a kid, it's a breach. Could be anything, sensitive data, equipment tampering. You don't take chances in aviation." Her rhetoric swelled, feeding the crowd's unease, and Marcus saw it take root, the way heads nodded, the way eyes hardened. They weren't seeing him anymore. They were seeing her story, a fiction spun from bias and fear. The barista looked away, her hands trembling as she stacked cups, and Marcus felt the isolation settle in, a cold fog wrapping around his heart. He wasn't just fighting Hensley, he was fighting a wall of doubt, a system that too often saw different before deserving. His phone rang on, unanswered, each tone stretching his hope thinner. The officers closed in, Tate's voice firm now. "Let's go, son. We'll sort it out downstairs." Marcus's knees weakened, but he stood his ground, the fire in his chest flickering against the tide. He didn't know how this would end, but he knew one thing. He wouldn't go quietly. Not when the sky was still calling. Finally, the line clicked. "Marcus?" James Freeman's voice cut through, deep and steady, a beacon in the dark. "Dad, they think I'm a criminal. They're taking me away." The words spilled out, raw and desperate, and James's reply was steel. "Hold on, son. I'm on my way." The call ended, but Hensley's laughter rang louder. "Daddy's coming? Good luck with that." She didn't know the force she'd just unleashed, and Marcus clung to that truth, a spark in the gathering storm. The pilot's lounge at Dallas International Airport thrummed with a tension so thick it seemed to hum alongside the jet engines rumbling beyond the walls. Marcus Freeman stood in the center of it all, a lone figure dwarfed by the storm of suspicion swirling around him. Captain Laura Hensley loomed before him, her pilot's uniform a stark silhouette against the lounge's muted tones, her voice slicing through the air like a gust across a runway. "We're done here," she declared, her eyes cold and unyielding as she turned to Officer Tate and his partner. "Take him downstairs, now. I've wasted enough time on this charade." Her words carried the weight of finality, a gavel falling on Marcus's dreams, and the room seemed to tilt beneath his feet. Marcus's hands gripped his phone, the screen still warm from his desperate call to his father, James Freeman. "Hold on, son. I'm on my way," James had said, his voice a lifeline Marcus clung to as the officer stepped closer. Officer Tate's face was a mask of reluctant duty, his hand hovering near his belt, while his partner's clipboard scratched out a rhythm that felt like a countdown to Marcus's undoing. The crowd, pilots, staff, onlookers, pressed in, their murmurs a low roar, their eyes a gallery of doubt and curiosity. Marcus felt exposed, raw, every breath a struggle against the tide pulling him under. His badge, tossed aside by Hensley, glinted faintly on the table, a discarded relic of the pride he carried into this room. He wanted to scream, to demand they see him, the boy who'd mapped the skies in his mind since he was 6, but his voice stayed trapped, a bird caged by fear. Hensley paced, her boots striking the floor with a cadence that echoed in Marcus's chest. "This is what happens when you let your guard down," she said, her voice rising to address the room. "A kid slips in, spins a story, and next thing you know, we're compromised. I've seen it before. 18 years in this industry, and I know a risk when it's staring me in the face." Her certainty was a weapon, wielded with precision, and Marcus felt it carve into him, each word a cut to the dream he'd nurtured with every sketch, every late-night study session. She didn't see a student, a winner of Horizon Airlines' Wings of Tomorrow program. She saw a threat, a shadow cast by her own fears, and she was determined to banish it. The officers moved in, Tate's hand brushing Marcus's arm, gentle but firm. "Let's go, son," he said, his tone softer than Hensley's but no less resolute. Marcus's knees trembled, but he planted his feet, his mother's voice echoing in his mind. "Stand tall, Marcus, even when they try to shrink you." "I'm not a threat," he said, his voice breaking through the haze, louder now, fueled by a spark of defiance. "I belong here. Call Miss Carter, please. She'll tell you." Hensley's head snapped toward him, her smirk a blade. "Enough excuses," she shot back. "You're out of here, whether you like it or not." Then the air shifted, a ripple of change cutting through the lounge's stifling heat. The glass doors burst open, propelled by a force that silenced the room in an instant. James Freeman strode in, his presence a thunderhead rolling across the plains, his dark suit crisp and commanding, his FAA badge catching the light like a star breaking through clouds. Behind him trailed a trio of officials, their faces etched with purpose, their steps synchronized with his. The crowd parted instinctively, a sea yielding to a ship, and Marcus's heart leapt, a bird freed from its cage. "Dad," he breathed, the word a prayer answered, a tether pulling him back from the abyss. James's eyes found Marcus first, softening with a love so deep it seemed to fill the room, then hardened as they swept the scene. Hensley's rigid stance, the officer's poised hands, the crowd's frozen stares. He crossed the floor in long, deliberate strides, his shadow falling over Marcus as he placed a hand on his son's shoulder, warm and steady. "You all right, Marcus?" he asked, his voice low but resonant, a calm that belied the storm brewing within. Marcus nodded, his throat tight, tears prickling at the edges of his vision. "I'm here now," James said, his grip tightening with reassurance. No one's taking you anywhere. Hensley blinked, her composure faltering for the first time, a crack in her armor. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice sharp but edged with uncertainty. James turned to her, his gaze a steel beam locking her in place. "James Freeman, Deputy Director of the Federal Aviation Administration," he said, each word a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through the room. "That's my son you're accusing. I want answers. Why is he being treated like a criminal?" His tone wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of years spent commanding respect. A man who'd risen from wrench-turning mechanic to a titan shaping the skies, and Hensley felt it, her shoulders stiffening under the pressure. The crowd stirred, whispers threading through the silence. FAA, Deputy Director, as realization dawned. Hensley clutched her radio tighter, her knuckles whitening. "Sir, he's in a restricted area with a suspect ID," she said, her voice faltering but defiant. "I was protecting this space. It's my duty." James's eyes narrowed, his calm sharpening into something piercing. "Your duty," he repeated, stepping closer, his presence towering without effort. "Where's your evidence? What made you call security on a 17-year-old with a valid pass?" He gestured to Marcus, who straightened, the warmth of his father's hand fueling a quiet courage. "You didn't check. You judged." Hensley opened her mouth, then closed it, her certainty unraveling. James turned to Officer Tate, his voice a command wrapped in velvet. "Get me the security footage. Now, let's see what really happened." Tate nodded, his hesitation gone, and radioed for the tapes, while Hensley's face drained of color, her bravado dissolving like mist in sunlight. James wasn't just a father, he was a force of nature, a man who'd taught Marcus to fly kites in their backyard, explaining lift and drag with a mechanic's hands and a dreamer's heart. That same strength stood here now, a shield against the chaos threatening to swallow his son. The TV flickered as the footage loaded, a grainy window into the truth. There was Marcus, walking in beside Ms. Carter, her HR badge clear as she handed him his ID with a smile, pointing him to a seat before hurrying off for a call. He sat, absorbed in the documentary, his posture unguarded, a boy lost in wonder, no sneaking, no malice, just a dreamer in his element. The room exhaled, a collective breath of reckoning, and Marcus felt the weight lift, his chest swelling with a vindication he hadn't dared hope for. "Ms. Carter burst through the door, breathless, her voice trembling with guilt. "Mr. Freeman, Marcus, I'm so sorry. I got tied up. Captain, he's with me. He's authorized." Hensley's jaw tightened, her eyes darting as the narrative slipped from her grasp. James faced the crowd, his voice steady but resonant, cutting through the haze. "This stops here. My son earned his place, something this industry needs to embrace, not reject. Last year, only 3% of U.S. pilots were black. That's not safety, that's failure." His words landed like a flare, illuminating the shadows Hensley had cast, and the room shifted. Pilots lowering their phones, the barista meeting Marcus's gaze with a flicker of shame, the janitor nodding slowly. Hensley's authority crumbled, her shoulders slumping as the tide turned. James looked at Marcus, his eyes softening again, a silent promise. "You're enough." "Captain Hensley," he said, his tone steel once more, "you've overstepped. This isn't over. We'll dig into this, all of it." She shrank, her radio slipping to her side, and Marcus met her gaze, not with triumph, but with a quiet resolve born from his father's strength. The lounge, once a prison, opened wide again, a runway cleared for takeoff, a sky reclaimed. James was here, the truth was out, and Marcus knew. The fight wasn't finished, but the turning point had begun. The pilot's lounge at Dallas International Airport lay cloaked in a stillness that felt almost reverent, the echoes of confrontation fading into the hum of distant engines, and the soft flicker of the TV screen replaying its endless loop of flight footage. Marcus Freeman stood beside his father, James Freeman, his breath steadying as the weight of the past hour began to lift, replaced by a fragile but growing sense of restoration. The security footage had played its truth, Marcus entering with Ms. Carter, his badge legitimate, his presence rightful, and the room had shifted, the crowd's murmur softening into a quiet reckoning. Captain Laura Hensley stood apart, her once commanding figure diminished, her hands empty of the radio that had been her weapon moments before. The tide had turned, and now justice was ready to take flight. James Freeman's voice broke the hush, resonant and unwavering, a beacon cutting through the lingering fog of doubt. "Captain Hensley," he said, his gaze locking onto her with the precision of a landing gear finding its mark. "Your actions today crossed a line effective immediately. You're suspended from all duties at Horizon Airlines. The FAA will conduct a full investigation into this incident, your judgment, your conduct, your history. This isn't just about my son, it's about accountability." His words carried a gravity that filled the room, each syllable a brick in a wall of consequence, and Marcus felt them settle into his chest, a balm over the wounds Hensley had inflicted. Hensley's face crumpled, the hard lines of her authority giving way to something raw and unguarded. "Mr. Freeman?" she began, her voice trembling, a thread pulled loose from her once impenetrable resolve. "I was only trying to protect this space. I didn't mean—" But James raised a hand, his gesture firm but not cruel, silencing her plea. "Intent doesn't erase impact," he said, his tone steady as steel. "We've uncovered 3 prior complaints against you, incidents of bias, of snap judgments against people who didn't fit your mold. This isn't a mistake, it's a pattern. And in aviation, patterns like that endanger more than just one boy. They threaten trust, safety, everything we stand for." His words weren't just for her, they were a declaration to the room, a promise that the sky would no longer be a fortress for prejudice. Marcus watched as Hensley's shoulders sagged, her eyes darting to the floor as if searching for a foothold she'd lost. For a moment, he saw beyond her stripes and her scorn, saw a woman undone, her pride unraveling in the face of her own reckoning. It wasn't triumph he felt, not exactly, but a quiet ache, a recognition of the cost of her choices. She'd built her world on vigilance, on a certainty that had hardened into something brittle, and now it was breaking. Officer Tate and his partner stepped forward, their faces solemn, their duty clear. "Captain Hensley, we need you to come with us," Tate said, his voice low, carrying a trace of regret. She nodded, her movements slow, almost mechanical, and followed them out, the crowd parting silently as she passed. Her boots echoed down the hall, a fading rhythm of a career in freefall, and Marcus felt the air shift. Justice wasn't loud here. It was deliberate, a steady climb toward altitude. The room exhaled, the tension dissipating like clouds after a storm, and James turned to the gathered staff, his presence a lighthouse guiding them forward. "This isn't the end," he said, his voice softening but no less firm. "It's a beginning. I'm launching Sky for All, a program to mentor kids like Marcus, to open doors that too often stay shut. Scholarships, training, a simulator app for every dreamer with a phone. We're building a future where no one has to prove they belong." His eyes met Marcus's, a spark of pride igniting between them, and Marcus felt his heart swell, his pain transforming into purpose. The crowd stirred, nods, a few tentative claps, and Marcus saw the barista wipe her eyes, the janitor smile faintly. Beyond these walls, whispers of Hensley's suspension were already spreading, a staff petition for diversity training gaining traction online, a quiet revolution taking root. Then a new voice cut through, warm and steady, pulling Marcus from his thoughts. Marcus Freeman? Captain Daniel Ortiz stepped forward, his dark eyes crinkling with a kindness that felt like sunlight after rain. His Horizon uniform bore the marks of a veteran, 15 years aloft, a Latino pilot who'd carved his own path through a world that hadn't always welcomed him. I saw what happened, he said, his hand extended, firm and calloused. You didn't deserve that. How about we fix this day? I've got a 737 at gate 12. Want to see the cockpit? Marcus's breath caught, a grin breaking through the shadows on his face. You mean it? He asked, his voice trembling with hope. Ortiz chuckled, a sound like a prop engine warming up. Mean it? Kid, I insist. They walked through the terminal, Ortiz's stride easy, his stories flowing like a river. I grew up in the Bronx, he said, his hands tracing invisible flight paths in the air. Folks said I'd never fly. Too loud, too brown, too everything. But I kept going. Proved them wrong one takeoff at a time. You remind me of me, Marcus. Don't let anyone ground you. His words sank into Marcus, a lifeline to a future he could still claim. They reached the gate, the 737's sleek frame gleaming under the hangar lights, and Ortiz led him up the jet bridge into the cockpit, a sanctuary of dials and screens, a throne built for dreamers. Marcus ran his fingers over the throttle, the cool metal grounding him, and for the first time that day he felt whole, his spirit climbing back to cruising altitude. Back in the lounge, the crowd had thinned, but the air buzzed with a new energy. James fielded questions from staff, his vision for Sky for All taking shape, while Marcus lingered near the window, watching planes taxi in the dusk. He pulled a small notebook from his pocket, his old sketching pad, edges worn from years of dreaming, and began to write. March 25th, 25. They tried to clip my wings, but I'm still here. The words flowed, a quiet vow to himself. He'd rise above this, not with anger, but with the steady grace of a plane finding its course. Ortiz's offer, James's fight, they were fuel, a reminder that the sky held allies too, not just gatekeepers. Later, Marcus organized a Dream Day Q&A at the airport, a spur-of-the-moment idea James greenlit with a proud nod. Kids from a local school swarmed the lounge, their eyes wide with wonder, their questions tumbling out. What's it like to fly? A boy asked, his voice small but eager. Marcus crouched to meet his gaze, his own voice steady now, a pilot's calm. It's like breathing, he said. You just have to believe you can, even when someone says you can't. The boy grinned, and Marcus felt a ripple of purpose. He wasn't just healing, he was lifting others with him. Justice had soared, not as a fleeting victory, but as a steady ascent. Hensley's fall was a lesson etched in silence, her regret a mirror for those who'd watched her unravel. Ortiz's hand on his shoulder, James's unwavering stand, they were the wind beneath Marcus's wings, carrying him toward a horizon he'd always known was his. He looked out at the runway, planes rising into the twilight, and knew this day wasn't the end of his dream. It was the moment it truly began to climb. The auditorium at Jefferson High School in Houston pulsed with a restless energy, the hum of teenage voices weaving through the air like the chatter of a busy tarmac. Marcus Freeman stood at the edge of the stage, his sneakers scuffing the worn wood, his hands steady as he adjusted the Sky for All badge pinned to his chest. It was a design of his own making, a silver wing curling around the words Dream Big, a symbol born from the ashes of a day that had nearly broken him. Months had passed since that confrontation in the pilot's lounge at Dallas International Airport, since Captain Laura Hensley's accusations had threatened to ground his dreams, but the echo of that moment lingered, a quiet fuel beneath his newfound purpose. Now, at 17, he wasn't just Marcus Freeman, the kid who loved planes. He was a voice, a spark, a young man stepping into a horizon wider than he'd ever imagined. He took a deep breath, the microphone cool against his palm, and stepped into the spotlight. 6 months ago, I stood in an airport lounge waiting to chase my dream, he began, his voice steady, carrying a warmth that filled the room. A pilot called me a threat, said I didn't belong, and security almost dragged me out. I was scared, terrified, but my dad showed up. The truth came out, and now I'm here to tell you this. No one gets to decide your place but you. The crowd leaned in. Students sprawled across folding chairs, teachers lining the walls, parents clutching coffee cups, and then erupted. Their applause a jet stream lifting Marcus higher. He felt it in his bones, a resonance that wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every kid in that room, every dreamer who'd ever been told their wings weren't enough. The world beyond that lounge had shifted in ways Marcus could scarcely believe. James Freeman, his father, and the FAA deputy director had turned a personal crisis into a clarion call, launching Sky for All with a ferocity that reshaped the aviation landscape. The program wasn't just a gesture, it was a revolution, a network of mentorships, scholarships, and a free simulator app that put flight controls in the hands of kids from coast to coast. Marcus had watched it unfold. Airlines rewriting hiring policies, pilots like Captain Daniel Ortiz leading workshops, airports plastered with posters declaring, "The sky is open." James's reforms weren't abstract. They were tangible. A runway cleared for those who'd been left on the sidelines, and Marcus felt a quiet pride knowing his story had lit the match. He'd become the program's youth advocate, a role he'd never envisioned but one that fit like a well-worn jacket. Schools like this one welcomed him, their auditoriums packed with faces that mirrored his own, brown, black, eager, uncertain, and he poured himself into every talk. "I used to sketch planes in my backyard," he told them, his voice softening as memory tugged at him. "My mom, Tanya, she'd sit with me, even after a double shift, and say, 'Marcus, you're gonna fly one day.' That day in Dallas, I thought I'd lost it, but I didn't, and you won't either." His words landed, a spark catching in the eyes of a girl in the front row, her notebook clutched tight, and Marcus knew she saw herself in him, just as he'd once seen himself in the pioneers he'd studied. The industry was listening too. James's vision had sparked a mentorship network, pairing seasoned pilots with rookies, a bridge between generations and backgrounds. Captain Daniel Ortiz, the man who'd shown Marcus a 737 cockpit when his spirit was bruised, now led sessions in New York, his Bronx grit a beacon for kids who'd never dared dream of wings. Airlines rolled out bias training, a direct response to Hensley's fall, and Marcus heard whispers of a National Aviation Day, free workshops in cities like Chicago and Atlanta, where kids built model planes and met pilots who looked like them. It was real, messy, imperfect change, and Marcus felt its weight, a responsibility he carried with quiet grace. His story had gone beyond the airport, beyond policy memos, spilling into the digital ether. Hashtag Sky for All trended for weeks, a hashtag that became a movement, teens posting photos of their first simulator flights, parents sharing tales of kids who'd found courage in Marcus's words. He'd launched Sky Stories, a podcast born from late-night talks with James over kitchen coffee, a platform to amplify voices like Ortiz's, like the female mechanic who'd fought her way into a hangar, like the shy boy from Oakland who'd aced his first virtual takeoff. Downloads climbed, listeners flooding his inbox with messages. "You made me believe I could do this." Marcus read them in his room, the walls still lined with old sketches, and felt a shiver of awe. He wasn't just telling his story, he was handing others the controls to theirs. At home, the bond with James deepened, a steady current beneath the whirlwind. They sat one evening on their porch, the Texas sky stretching wide above them, a canvas of stars and jet trails. "You're my hero, Marcus," James said, his voice thick with emotion, his eyes tracing the horizon. You took a storm and turned it into this, a whole new sky. Marcus looked at him. The man who taught him to fly kites and fight for what mattered, and smiled. You showed me how, Dad, he said, his words soft but sure. You always have. James squeezed his shoulder, a silent vow, and Marcus felt the past and future knit together, a legacy of resilience, of love, of wings unfurled. He'd flown his first simulator solo not long after, a Cessna banking over a virtual Dallas skyline, his hands steady on the controls. The screen glowed, the horizon tilting as he climbed, and Marcus felt a rush that wasn't just adrenaline, it was belonging, a homecoming to the place he'd always known was his. The simulator beeped, a landing executed with a precision he'd honed through years of dreaming, and he leaned back, the weight of that March day a distant echo. He wasn't the scared kid in the lounge anymore. He was a pilot in the making, a voice for the voiceless, a thread in a tapestry of change. The fallout from that day had left its mark. Captain Laura Hensley, stripped of her wings after a thorough FAA probe, had faded from the headlines, her suspension a quiet testament to accountability. Marcus didn't dwell on her, not out of bitterness, but because he'd chosen to look forward. Her story was a cautionary note, a reminder that power unchecked could crash, but it wasn't his to carry. He'd learned from Ortiz, from James, that redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about building something better from its wreckage. The horizon stretched wide now, a canvas of possibility Marcus painted with every step. He spoke at community centers, his badge a symbol kids reached for, their fingers brushing the silver wing as if it could lift them too. He saw it in their eyes, hope, defiance, a hunger to soar, and knew his journey wasn't just his own. It was theirs, a collective ascent toward a sky that no longer asked for proof of worth. Diversity isn't a buzzword, he told a crowd in Memphis, his voice rising with conviction. It's strength. It's every kid who's ever looked up and seen themselves in the clouds. The future doesn't wait. It flies, and it's ours to claim. Then one night, after a talk in Austin, Marcus stood alone on a balcony, the city lights shimmering below like a runway at dusk. He pulled out his old sketchbook, its pages yellowed but alive with planes he'd drawn as a boy, and added a new one, a sleek jet, its wings bold, its nose pointed toward a dawn he could feel breaking. He wrote beneath it, "For Mom, for Dad, for me, for everyone who dares." The wind carried the sound of a plane overhead, its rumble a heartbeat in the dark, and Marcus closed his eyes, letting it wash over him. The sky was his, not as a gift, but as a right he'd fought for, a horizon he'd widened for others to share. The world was listening, changing, soaring, and Marcus Freeman was at its helm, not with a pilot's license yet, but with a voice that echoed louder than engines, a courage that lifted higher than wings. The lounge was a memory, a shadow burned away by the light of what came after. He'd turned a storm into a sunrise, and as he looked out at the vast, waiting sky, he knew this was only the beginning. Marcus Freeman's story begins not with the roar of jet engines or the gleam of a pilot's wings, but with the quiet scratch of a pencil on paper, a boy sketching planes under the watchful eye of a Texas sky. At 17, he stood on the cusp of a dream forged through years of wonder, watching contrails from his bedroom window, tracing Cessnas with his mother Tanya at a local airstrip, dreaming of a cockpit that felt as distant as the stars. That dream carried him to Dallas International Airport on March 25, 2025. A badge from Horizon Airlines' Wings of Tomorrow program pinned to his chest, a symbol of his victory in a national essay contest. It was a day meant for triumph, a first step toward the skies he'd claimed as his own. But instead, it became a crucible, a test of resilience that would redefine not just Marcus, but the world around him. In the pilot's lounge, Captain Laura Hensley saw not a dreamer, but a threat, her 18 years of experience warped by a vigilance that had hardened into prejudice. She tore his badge away, called security with a certainty that brooked no doubt, and turned Marcus's moment of pride into a public humiliation. The crowd watched, pilots, staff, strangers, some with curiosity, others with silent judgment, their eyes a weight that pressed Marcus down. He stood there, a black teen in a space that rarely reflected him, his voice trembling but defiant as he pleaded for truth. Hensley's words cut deep. "You don't belong here." A blade aimed at his spirit, threatening to sever the wings he'd spent a lifetime building. Yet beneath the fear, beneath the shame, Marcus held fast to his mother's mantra: stand tall, even when they try to shrink you. He called his father, James Freeman, and waited, a spark of hope flickering in the storm. That spark ignited when James strode into the lounge, his FAA deputy director badge a shield, his presence a thunderclap that silenced Hensley's accusations. The footage revealed the truth. Marcus escorted in by Ms. Carter, his place earned, and the tide turned. James didn't just defend his son, he dismantled Hensley's narrative with a calm that belied its power, exposing her bias as part of a broader pattern. Suspended and humbled, Hensley walked away, her fall a quiet testament to accountability, while Marcus felt the ground steady beneath him. Captain Daniel Ortiz stepped in then, a Latino pilot whose own outsider's journey mirrored Marcus's, offering a cockpit tour that stitched up the day's wounds with kindness. James announced Sky for All, a vision to open aviation's doors, and Marcus found his pain alchemized into purpose, a program born from his ordeal, a runway for others to rise. From that day, Marcus Stetini soared. He became a youth advocate, his voice echoing in school halls and community centers, his Sky for All badge, a symbol kids reached for with awe. The industry shifted, mentorships bloomed, simulator apps reached underserved hands, Aviation Day workshops lit up cities, and Marcus's story went viral. Hashtag Sky for All, a rallying cry for dreamers everywhere. His podcast, Sky Stories, amplified voices like Ortiz's, weaving a tapestry of resilience that listeners clung to, their messages flooding his inbox. You made me believe. At home, James watched him with pride, their bond a steady wind beneath Marcus's ascent, and Marcus flew his first simulator solo, a virtual Cessna climbing over Dallas, his hands steady, his heart full. What began as a near-crushing blow ended as a legacy, a horizon widened not just for him, but for all who dared to look up. The lessons of Marcus's journey cut deep, resonating far beyond the tarmac. First, it's a testament to resilience, the kind that doesn't roar but persists, quiet and unyielding through doubt and dismissal. Marcus didn't lash out at Hensley. He stood his ground, called for help, and let truth take wing. In a world that often tests us, whether through workplace bias, personal setbacks, or societal ceilings, his story whispers, hold fast. You don't need to break to bend the arc toward justice. Second, it's about the power of allies. James's arrival, Ortiz's kindness, they weren't just rescues, they were affirmations that no one rises alone. We all need champions, and we all have a chance to be one, lifting others when the wind turns against them. Finally, it's a call to transform pain into purpose. Marcus didn't let that day define him as a victim. He turned it into a ladder for others, proving that our hardest moments can seed our greatest gifts. For us, living in 2025, these lessons are a compass. At 25, you might face a boss who doubts your worth. Stand tall, seek your James, and build your case with quiet strength. At 35, juggling family and ambition, remember Ortiz, offer a hand to someone faltering, knowing your support might be their lifeline. At 55, reflecting on a career's highs and lows, take Marcus's lead. Use your scars to light someone else's path, turning experience into mentorship. We all meet our Hensleys, moments or people who shrink us. But Marcus shows us the sky doesn't close. It waits, vast and patient, for us to claim it. Start small. Speak up at work. Mentor a colleague. Share your story. The ripple starts with you, just as it did with a boy and his badge. This isn't the end of Marcus's flight. It's a chapter, a launch pad for stories yet to come. And that's where you come in. If his journey moved you, if it sparked a flicker of hope or a resolve to rise, join us. Subscribe to this channel, hit that button, ring the bell, and become part of a community that celebrates resilience, champions dreamers, and lifts voices like Marcus's. Your support fuels more content like this, more tales of grit and grace that remind us what's possible. Let's keep this sky open together, because the next story might be yours, and we'll be here to tell it. Fly with us.